though it is not, I mean, it is kind of related to the question, right? So it's always good if that if there is a key term used in the question, right, around which the question would evolve, it's good that you define it at the start of the answer, so that examiner know for sure that you know the definition, you know what it means, and so on and so forth, right? So what is recession, students? The idea is fairly simple. Recession is basically decrease of economic activity. Decrease in economic activity, which leads to decrease in GDP, is basically a recession. Now, recession can happen because of economic and non-economic reasons. Economic activity, nothing about this. COVID, during this pandemic, right, what happened? There was this global health issue that caused a recession, right? People were not going out. It was a pandemic, right? It was a lockdown situation across the globe. Economic activity was not taking place as usual, right? And therefore, GDP of countries decreased, right? So that's non-economic. It was obviously a non-economic reason, right? But then there could be economic reasons as well, right? So economic reasons could be, just to quickly give you some idea, right? So if inflation skyrockets during some time period, right? Then what would people do? Perhaps they can become more careful, right? Very high rate of inflation, right? Or as we say, hyperinflation could cause recession. Why? Because people can become careful with their spending, right? So think about this. What's happening in the world right now due to oil prices and all that? I mean, it's not in a lot of countries, by the way. I was reading a report and it said that in USA, the inflation is highest in the last 10 years. So there, I guess it was 10 point something, right? So that 10% rate of inflation in USA is highest in the last decade, right? So it has never touched that much in the last 10 years. So what I'm trying to say, fuel prices have skyrocketed, and due to that, cost push inflation is taking place and all that, right? So what would that do? Since people purchasing power would decrease, they can become more careful with their spending. So they only spend on basic necessities, don't spend on other things, and therefore the overall economic activity can decrease, right? Are we good on this? Right, right. Right, that's correct. That's correct, Zohan. Okay, now after you've defined in this question what recession is, now the question was asking you that which of the two calculations would help producers or entrepreneurs to make better decisions during a recession. Which of the two concepts would help entrepreneurs, business people, to make better decisions about their products? Income elasticity of demand and price elasticity, right? The second one was price elasticity of demand. Okay, now students, think about this. What is income elasticity of demand? First of all, you need to explain that. Similarly, then you'll explain what price elasticity of demand is, and then you will comment on which of the two is useful, why. Like, firstly, you will tell how both of these two are useful, and then you can eventually comment on which is useful more, right? Because that's what the question asks for, right? That which is more useful, right? So you'll start off by defining. It's very simple. We've done it a couple of times. Income elasticity of demand is a formula that calculates responsiveness of change in demand for a product due to change in consumer income. So the simple way we calculate this is that how much would be the change in demand for a good due to change in consumers' income. Now comes in the main part, Ron, here where you will say that this measure, this formula helps you to distinguish between different type of products. It helps producers or anyone, income elasticity of demand helps producers to distinguish between different type of products. Now think about this. When there's a recession, there's low economic activity, income levels are low. How consumers spending change during pandemic, right? A lot of people also lost their jobs, income levels were falling, people were insecure about their jobs and all that, right? So what do you expect that during that time period, did you observe any change in your parents spending? Can you at least imagine what type of change in spending behavior would arise due to fall in income levels, right? So people start spending less, right? People start, as I was telling you, start spending less. And it's not that they can cut on spending on basic things, right? Can you cut on spending on basic things, right? Not really, right? Not really. And the things, the products that you actually cut on are the luxury items, right? So for now, at any point in time, I'm insecure about my job. I don't know if, I'll be getting my paycheck for the next month or not, right? Would I keep consuming the way I used to? No, right? I'll cut on all the unnecessary things I'm spending on, right? I might stop going out that much. I will not do a lot of shopping and all these other things, right? So these are basically luxuries, right? So first of all, you'll tell that after defining what income elasticity of demand is, that they are luxuries and then they are necessities, right? So the consumers are expected to cut on their luxuries first, right? When there's a recession and fall in income levels. Therefore, the demand for luxuries is expected to decrease significantly, right? Exactly, right? So demand for luxuries is expected to decrease significantly, right? So let's say if this is 3.5% income elasticity of demand for luxuries. Now, what it means, can any one of you interpret this for me? So if there is a luxury item for which the income elasticity of demand is 3.5, who can interpret this value for me? What 3.5 means? What is 3.5? No, it is elastic, definitely. But how would you write it down in words? Zon, that's correct. It's elastic. Since it's greater than 1, it's elastic. How do you write in words? So the 3.5 shows you what? What is 3.5? So this formula is giving you a value of 3.5 for, let's say, movie tickets. Let's assume a product that will help you better understand. If the income elasticity of demand for movie tickets turns out to be 3.5, what is it actually showing us? The amount of the people are ready to spend on luxuries. Elastic demand. That's correct, Abdullah. That is elastic because it's more than 1. That's elastic. Okay. Now, students, why would you not ask me that? I've told you a couple of times. Think about it. 3.5 means, now listen to me very carefully, that for 1% change in income, whatever the variable in the denominator is, what for 1% change in income, because that's the variable in the denominator, there would be 3.5% change in the demand for movie tickets. I repeat. So a value of 3.5, which is income elasticity of demand for movie tickets, means that for 1% change in income, there will be 3.5% change in demand for movie tickets. Now we did not specify whether it's an increase or a decrease. So you have to specify then, right? So since it's a normal product, so for 1% decrease in income, because this is what is related to a question at the moment, for 1% decrease in income, there will be 3.5% decrease in demand for movie tickets. Or vice versa, if there is 1% increase in income, there will be 3.5% increase in demand for movie tickets. Students, are you following me? Not following me, right? So for 1% change in the variable in the denominator, there will be 3.5% change in the variable in the numerator. Got it? Easy, simple? Okay, great. Now that means that the demand for luxury items will decrease significantly. The demand for luxury items will decrease significantly. Similarly, for the necessities, can you afford to cut on necessities a lot? Right? Can you afford to cut on the demand for necessities a lot? No, right? So therefore, the demand for necessities would be inelastic, less than 1, right? Which means that for 1% change, for 1% decrease in income, there will be only 0.5% decrease in demand for, let's say, bread or eggs or whatever, right? Basic necessities. You can't cut on that, food items and so on, right? Easy? Students, are you following me or not? Any confusion so far, right? So the biggest hit would be on the luxury items, and you need to explain this in the question, right? So if you're still having trouble understanding how this is related, read the question again. Discuss the extent to which concepts of income elasticity of demand and price elastic demand might be useful to an entrepreneur in this economy. Which economy? Which is facing recession, and consider which would be more useful. So through this calculation, producers would get to find out, or entrepreneurs would get to find out, that if they're producing a luxury items, they are in big time trouble. They are in trouble, right? So during COVID, I can tell you for a fact that all these luxury producers were not happy at all, right? Who would go to movie theater? Who would go to a concert? Who would go to watch a match in the stadium? And none of these things happened, right? Right? Very recently, things are getting back to normal and so on and so forth, right? Are you getting me? So that's what you need to understand, right? But I mean, if during pandemic, someone, if you think of if a company that manufactures bread, or farm what is that called, right? Providing farm products or something like that, right? So they don't need to worry about it because they know the demand will stay stable. Um, they are normal goods. They are definitely normal goods. So within normal goods, there are two categories: necessities and luxury. So normal good is any product which has a positive sign to it. Any product with a positive sign is a normal good. Do remember, students, because the change in positive sign shows what I told you yesterday. Quickly, positive sign shows you what? That the direction of the two variables is same or different. Direction of the two variables, positive sign shows you what? The direction of the two variables is same or different. It's same, right? So higher the income, higher the demand, lower the income, lower the demand, right? So it goes both for necessities like food items, right? And for luxuries. Both are normal goods. But what's the difference between the two? What's the difference? Which is more elastic, which is less elastic? Luxuries are more elastic, right? When incomes change, their demand changes more. More elastic means that when incomes change, demand for luxuries change more. For necessities, demand is kind of stable. It's not that you become rich, you start consuming more food, not the basic items, right? Or it's not that if you become poor, you just stop. I mean, in very extreme case of poverty, you might start eating very less, but otherwise, I mean, it's not that a small decrease in your income, you start consuming less. Yes or no? Easy. We good on this, students. Can we move on? Right? Okay, now after you've explained, we haven't, by the way, fully explained income elasticity of demand. There's one more aspect to income elasticity of demand, and that's inferior goods. During recession, people start using more inferior goods. Now, what are inferior goods, right? Inferior goods are cheaper versions of a product. So cheaper version of a product are known as inferior goods. Simply speaking, let me give you an example, right? So there are Samsung, Apple, and all these expensive phones, and then there are cheaper brands, Redmi, Huawei, and all that, right? So if people incomes are decreasing, they will, as I said, they will be more careful. They will start spending less and become more careful with their spending. So they are very likely to switch to inferior goods, right? Like for instance, think of two things, right? Expensive high-end restaurant, right? High-end restaurant compared to McDonald's and KFC, right? Now, high-end restaurant is what? It's a kind of luxury and a normal good, right? And KFC and McDonald's, I mean, nowadays, the way it is, right? I mean, for some people, it's still quite kind of expensive, and for them, it's still a luxury. But I mean, are you getting me? So for most people, McDonald's and KFC nowadays is more of an inferior good. So when people otherwise cannot afford to go to high-end restaurants because their incomes are falling, but they can quickly order fast food. Yes or no? Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Competing. Okay. I don't know. They would must have then, more high-end products. Got it. Very nice. Very nice. It's a Chinese brand, right? Okay. Are we good on this? So who will benefit during recession? Who will benefit? What type of producers or what type of companies will benefit during recession when incomes are falling? That produce inferior goods because their demand will increase. Inferior goods have a negative income elasticity of demand, students. So that means their demand would increase. So if it's 0 point, let's say if it's negative 1.5, that means that for 1% decrease in income, what will be the change in demand? The demand will increase by 1%. So if incomes are falling, a lot of people are switching from high-end restaurants to KFC, McDonald's. Yes or no? Is it making sense or not? Chinese, great. Right? We go on this, students, any confusion? Anything that's not clear, right? So this is how producers will make use of income elasticity of demand to determine that what will be the change in the demand for the good, what will be the change in their revenue, because if demand is less, obviously revenue is less. If demand is more, revenue is more, right? So these are the two things that they will be able to calculate through this. Any confusion? Luxuries are the ones who suffer the most during recession. Necessities are kind of stable. Demand doesn't decrease that much. It does decrease, not that much, right? And for the inferior products, inferior goods, producers of inferior goods benefit the most because when incomes are falling, people are switching to their brands. So they get to produce more and sell more. Easy. Yeah, I did know about that scandal that happened with the Huawei. Yeah. Got it. Right, students, is everyone clear? Any confusion so far? Anything that's not clear? Can you move on? Okay, now moving forward, what about price elasticity of demand? So price elasticity of demand, again, you will explain what is it. It's a formula that shows responsiveness or change in demand for a good due to change in its price. Now, when there is a recession and there is a decrease in income of consumers, right? What will that do to consumers? Obviously, I told you, right? Consumers become more careful with their spending. They only spend on basic necessities and things like that. So during recession, just remember, right? During recession, like the one we faced during pandemic, right? People were only buying basic necessities, right? Which have inelastic demand, right? Why? Because I mean, food is a necessity. You have to spend on that. Paying electricity bills is important because you won't have electricity otherwise, right? Paying your rent is important because otherwise, your landlord can throw you out, right? And things like that. But during pandemic, people were not spending. I don't know of anyone who went out and firstly, the shops were closed, but even after they opened, no one was like, oh, I need to go do some shopping, right? Are you getting me? Because incomes are decreasing. You want to save as much as you can. You're not very certain how long the pandemic will last, what effect it will have on your incomes, overall the profits of your company. Because if companies' profits are decreasing, what do? If company where you work, their profits are decreasing, students, what effect? Why is that a problem for you? Is that a problem for you? Right? That is definitely a problem for you because they will lay off, right? They will lay off. They will not want to, hire exactly unemployment, right? That will cause unemployment. They will lay off, right? Extra people, which did happen, right? During COVID. So these are all the things, right? So producers will get to benefit from the knowledge of price elasticity of demand by the idea that if they're producing elastic product, right, which has elastic demand, so they would know that their demand is expected to decrease, right? Their demand is expected to decrease. Like it includes all the elastic goods, just like income elastic demand includes all the luxuries, right? Which are not necessities. And inelastic includes what? Necessities. Yes or no? Right? So that's what you need to remember. Easy? Redundancies. Yes, correct. Right? Okay. Now, after you've explained all this with examples, then you need to comment on which of the two is more useful. Which of the two is more useful? I'll wait for your response to, right? Which of the two is more useful to help producers decide about their production and all that. So out of income and price elasticity of demand, which would be more useful? What do you think? The answers shouldn't be that difficult. So what happens in a recession? In a recession, incomes are changing, right? So which variable would help you more? Obviously, income elasticity of demand. Yes or no? Because then you're directly finding the relationship between incomes and demand for your good. Right, right. Easy? Got it? Simple? Any confusion? Anything that's not clear? Right, right. Good. Okay. Right. Okay. Now we will take one question from Zuhan, right? So let's take one question. Not really, not really, not in this question, Abdullah. I mean, so if they would have asked you that what is price elasticity of demand and how the price elasticity of demand for two products is different, so then to explain that, let's say for more elastic, the change in demand is more, and for less elastic, the change in demand is less, then making a graph would be a good idea there. But I mean, in this case, it's not asking you to explain more about price elasticity of demand, but instead it asks you to apply to ask you that how much applicable this concept is in making decisions, business decisions, right? So graph would not add much value, so you don't need to worry about that, right? Okay, now we have a question here, right? Okay, which one? I'll quickly read through the answer and then we'll discuss. Is this one question only, Zohan? Okay, discuss whether a government should use monetary or fiscal policy to solve the problem of deflation in an economy. By the way, this is the same question, the exam that we are attempting, right? So we'll first read through Zohan's question and then Zohan's answer, and then we'll discuss what he did include, which was correct, which he did not include, which he should have, right? So we'll comment on that. Discuss whether a government should use monetary or fiscal policy to solve the problem of deflation in an economy. Got it? Okay, so deflation is sustained fall in the price level. There are two types of deflation: good deflation, which is caused by increase in supply, and bad deflation, which is caused by reduction in aggregate demand, right? Monetary policy is a measure through which the government influence aggregate demand in the economy. The instrument of monetary policy are interest rate, exchange rate, and money supply. The government should use monetary policy to reduce the problem of deflation using the money supply if it's a bad deflation. The government should increase the money supply in the economy by which banks will lend loans to people on lower interest rate. This will increase the purchasing power of people, causing the demand to increase. And as per by law of demand, the quantity will increase. Okay. Moving forward, then he has made a graph. So he has shown that aggregate demand will increase when money supply will increase, right? So that's what he wanted to show, that higher the money supply, meaning more loans being issued, more aggregate demand, and therefore higher aggregate demand would mean rise in prices. Okay, as shown in the graph, just a second. As shown in the graph, as the money supply will increase, the demand for goods and services will shift from AD to AD1, causing a rise in the prices by P to P2, with the problem of solving reduction. Okay, right. The government can also use the interest rate to solve the problem of deflation. By reducing the interest rate, people will save less because they will get less profit on their saved money. On banks, conversely, will spend more on the uh, other, right, by reduction in interest rate, right? Okay, then moving on. The loans will be available on low interest rate. This will encourage investment, causing the problem, right? That if the money supply will increase, price of products will rise, causing a failure. I did not get this part. The loans will be available on low interest rate. This will encourage investment. That's correct. Causing the problem that if the money supply will increase, the price of products will fall. How? Right. So if there's more investment, aggregate demand is increasing, so prices will rise. Right. As shown in the diagram, I think you used the wording. It was a typo. Again, it was a typo. There will be shift in supply. Okay. So you said if they're investing more, interest rates are low. So in the long run, now Zohan, this wording is very important, right? So think about this, students. Now this is important for everyone. So what Zohan was trying to say is that if interest rates are low, now just try to understand the relationship. Lower interest rates, more borrowing. More borrowing also includes more investment. Yes or no? People borrow, businesses borrow to invest. When they do that, in the long run, production potential of businesses will increase, which will cause the aggregate supply to shift to the right. Now, when you use the word long run, because Johan, it doesn't happen like this. If you invest today, it takes couple of months at least, right? To have more output, which means lower prices later on, right? So do use the wording short run, long run. Short run meaning short time period, like instantly kind of, and long run means longer time periods, like couple of months. Got it? Easy. So that is how you should do that as shown, because otherwise if I would have been your examiner, I would have been confused that whether this kid did a typo or what he's trying to do. But with long run, short run, things become simple. As shown in the figure, there will be a shift in the demand curve to rightwards from AD to AD1, which will increase the prices, blah blah blah, right? In monetary policy, the exchange rate can also use to reduce the problem of deflation. This can be achieved government devaluing its currency, by which the imported raw material will get expensive, causing cost push inflation. Now, on the other hand, the demand for inputs will be reduced, right? Due to devalue, demand for imports would reduce too, right? And by this, the domestic producers will have monopoly, letting them to charge higher prices. Okay, as shown in the diagram, by devaluation, the exchange rate, the imports imported raw material will get expensive, which will shift the aggregate supply from AS to AS1, and supply will rise from this to this and all that. Correct. Okay. Now, the fiscal policy. Okay, this still goes on. The fiscal policy is a measure through which the government influences the aggregate demand by the help of taxes and government spending. Okay, the government using the fiscal policy can solve the problem of deflation by reducing the tax on incomes and increasing tax on producers, and increasing tax on producers. This will lead the purchasing power of people to rise, causing a rightward shift in the demand curve, which will lead eventually the prices to rise, and tax on producers will increase the cost of production, which will lead to profits, to prices to rise, as the producers will be willing to have break even, and these costs are and their costs are being covered by using the government spending um, instrument. The government should increase the government spending. If that's the inflation, it will cause it will increase the problem, aggregate amount, shift the right to the right, and prices will increase and inflation will be solved, right? The government should use the monetary policy, as it will have more instruments than fiscal policy, as it will right, not even the domestic uh, demand, but the international demand, by changing the exchange rate, charging the exchange rate by the need, but it might can prove the okay. Now, Zohan, I must say, I mean, I've been an examiner through, I have been a teacher throughout my life, but this writing is going a little bit to illegible side, right? And you don't want that. I mean, the don't deduct, provoke, right? Provoke the what? Retaliation? Is this retaliation? BOP, retaliation. Okay, right? By the BOP will be misbalanced. The money supply is able to reduce the deflation, but it might lead to inflation, which can cause another problem for the country to deal with, as solving the interest rate, the problem deflation will have. Okay, now, right, now, right. Okay, so very honest and, very honest feedback on this question. First of all, I would say this last part is getting too messy and too confusing. Firstly, writing is one reason. Secondly, you haven't used words which I would understand that what are you trying to do. Now you're trying to sum it up, summarize it, suggest me something, propose me something. These action words are very important, right? In the end, in short, at last, to summarize, these are the words, students, you should be using, right? I mean, I'm just giving an example, right? Because that really helps the examiner to see where are you going with this, right? Then another thing, I mean, which I'm having trouble with, that full stops are missing, right? And this is kind of important, right? I'm not a big fan of grammar, but full stops will help me understand that where this line ends and where the next line starts. So I don't make and get confused that you are causing either inflation to change balance of payments or balance of payments to change exchange rate. What is changing what? Or again, in economics essays, it's all about examiner trying to understand whether you have the concept and the understanding to make the correct links between different variables. Are you getting me? So that's something that you need to be careful with. At least the full stop should be there for me to know where to stop and all that, right? Then this last paragraph, I would say, was not helping at all. The other explanation was good, but even in the other explanation was good, absolutely correct. Analysis was great, but the problem is it lacks coherence, right? It lacks coherence, and it lacks knowledge part is excellent. Knowledge part is excellent. Even explanation part is okay, right? Now think about this. Now let me exactly tell you. Now other students also get to read the question and everything, right? Now let's now do it my way, right? Let's see what I do differently. Okay, discuss whether the government should use monetary or fiscal policy to solve the problem of deflation in an economy. Now, first of all, we need to see that whether we have defined deflation in the A part. We have, right? Yes or no? So you don't need to go about defining deflation again, but it's a one-line statement. So if you want to rewrite it, not a problem, as Zohan did. So deflation is a persistent decrease in general price level, right? One line doesn't harm you, right? You have explained it. Very good. Then take some time to define what monetary and fiscal policy is, which Zohan did. He did define monetary policy, then started off with monetary policy, and then he later on defined fiscal policy and then wrote about fiscal policy. That's also fine. But I would have done slightly different. I would have defined monetary policy first, defined fiscal policy first, and then would have written about that, how monetary policy would help fight deflation, and then later on perhaps how fiscal policy, like I will include both, but I can start off with anyone next. But I mean, that doesn't make any difference. Do define, right? So what is monetary policy? So monetary policy is said by, you did not, by the way, mention this. Monetary policy is a macroeconomic policy set by the country's central bank independently, right? I mean, these are just words that show your command and knowledge. Are you getting me? Now, this might not be getting you some extra credit for it because that's not directly related to the question, but it shows a very good and solid impression to the examiner that you know that central banks are independent, right? The word independent or autonomous will very much convey the meaning what you're trying to say. Are you getting it? Right? So you'll say monetary policy is a macroeconomic policy, right? You know, it affects the entire economy that is set by the country's central bank independently or autonomously, right? To affect the country's money supply and interest rates, which in turn affects its exchange rate as well. Okay. Now, the money supply, right? And the interest rate. First things on the knowledge part I'm trying to explain. So the two things go hand in hand. Now, this is very important. Students, listen to me. I'm telling you a very important thing. In monetary policy, technically, there are not two policy instruments. It's technically one policy instrument, right? Okay, think about this. You have to, right? So, Zahn, I would say uh, eight, eight, I would say, right? And this could have been easily higher just because of the grammar part, the wording part, that has costed you all the marks. Because if I'm not able to read, if the examiner is not able to read and understand, I mean, he can't help it. What can he do, right? He doesn't know. He's not sitting in front of you for you to explain explain it to him or her, right? So that is how you need to think about it. If someone is reading independently, they should read writing. I totally understand, right? Nowadays, I mean, back in my day, even we used to write, but now with your generation, everything is about typing, everything is about, texting and all that, right? So won't be surprised to know you hardly write anything, you guys, or very less on that thing. But at least the basic grammar should be there for me to understand, what you're saying, right? Okay, great, perfect, sounds good. Okay, now listen to this. This is a very important point I'm about to explain to you, students. In monetary policy, technically there is one policy instrument. Now, what do I mean by policy instrument? So it's basically the money supply that derives everything. Listen to me carefully. In monetary policy, it's basically the money supply that changes, money supply that changes to change interest rates. Are you getting me? So what is causing change in what? Always in economics, be very careful as to what is causing a change in what, right? So it's the money supply that causes a change in interest rate. Now, what is money supply made up of, right? I did tell you, right? So currency notes and what? Bank loans. What bank loans? Commercial bank loans, right? Commercial banks are private banks, right? Okay. Now, when any of these two would increase, what would that do to interest rate? That would cause your interest rates to decrease. If this is going up, right, it's not always that the central bank is always printing more money. When we say increase in money supply, we don't mean that, central bank has just put up a machine that's printing money and that. Sometimes they do that, right? It's not like that. Sometimes the increase in money supply could also be because of the fact that commercial banks are creating more loans. They're creating more loans, giving more loans. People are borrowing, right? That's also part of money supply, right? So you explain this. Then you'll say that due to change in money supply, interest rates change. And now it is the interest rates. Listen to me carefully, students. Now it is the interest rates that affect the economic activity then, right? Are you getting this one? Is this making, is it sounding now more organized, right? Now, money supply gets changed, which affects your interest rate in turn, and then interest rates affect your economic activity, right? So the idea is money supply increases, interest rates go down. Why? Think about this. More money becoming available, right? More money, perhaps more currency notes I had to write. Why did I write loans? My bad. Currency notes, right? So if the central bank is printing more currency notes, right? More notes are becoming available, and banks can issue more loans. Banks can issue more loans, right? And that means more loans, lower interest rate, right? When interest rate falls, similarly, if they are directly issuing more loans, by the way, we'll talk about all of this as part of A2. I mean, there's no point in going in that much detail, right? So if more currency notes are being printed or if more loans are being issued, interest rates will go down. If interest rates go down, what will that do? That will make your borrowing cheaper. When borrowing is cheaper, what will people do? They'll borrow more. They'll borrow more for consumption. Businesses will borrow more to investment, right? And things like that. When this happens, right? When this happens, what happens to your aggregate demand? Now, even in this question, Zohan, you should have explained briefly that aggregate demand is made up of 5 components: consumption, investment, government spending, exports minus imports. Even though in your answer, it was evident that the student has understanding of aggregate demand concepts. So even if you don't write it explicitly, I'm just explaining it to other students, right? So reading your response, I totally got the idea that the student knows components of aggregate demand. So even if you don't write it explicitly, that's fine. But some students want it more organized. That's why, right? So then you'll say that if interest rates are low, consumers will consume more because borrowing is cheaper. And do insert some examples, right? So you could have said that, they might be borrowing more for home loans, mortgages. You know what mortgage is, right? They would borrow more to make a new home mortgage, right? Car financing, blah, 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 right? I mean, it just sounds a little fancy, right? Okay. Then similarly, businesses might be borrowing more for investment. They can expand their production potential, things like that, right? Are you getting me? Right, correct, right? And so on. When that happens, aggregate demand increases, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right, so deflation will be controlled, right? That's what you should have explained, right? Then as far the exchange rates are concerned, right? So the monetary policy can also independently affect the exchange rates. So that part, that explanation was good, where you explained that how exchange rates can independently, or simply speaking, exchange rates can affect your economic activity. So if your exchange rates are, exchange rate is becoming depreciated, right? So that will have 2 effects, as you explained in your answer. With depreciation of exchange rate, your imports become more expensive. So that will lead to imported inflation, as we say, right? Because raw material coming from other. So I'm ending the link. Join again. Imported inflation, right? Right. Join again because the link will be. I'll take 5, 6 more minutes. Right. Right. Exactly. Some fancy words like you don't need to go out of the way to, but sentence structure and grammar is most important. Right. Rejoin with the same link.